listener production.
Hi, Natarsha Belling with you and welcome to the afternoon edition of The Briefing. Coming up in our deep dive, the latest twist in the Murdoch family battle for power. After a bitter court dispute over who will run the media empire when Rupert Murdoch passes away, the family has announced they've reached a new multi-billion-dollar deal, with eldest son Lachlan cementing his position as heir. We unpack all the developments in just a moment. But first, let's check the afternoon headlines this Tuesday, the 9th of September. A boat carrying Swedish activist Greta Thunberg heading to Gaza has allegedly been hit by a drone. The vessel, known as the Family Boat, is part of a group of around 20 ships attempting to deliver food and medicine to Gaza in defiance of Israel's naval blockade. The flotilla organiser issued a statement saying one of its main boats was struck by what is suspected to be a drone, with this video emerging online shortly afterwards.
Captain! We've been hit by what appears to be a drone and the vessel's on fire. There's a fire in the front deck.
No injuries were reported, with the group planning to finish the trip. The Finance Sector Union has slammed ANZ's move to slash thousands of jobs after the bank posted a recent increase in profits. ANZ has announced 3,500 jobs will go over the next 12 months, with another 1,000 contractors also to be slashed, which it says is part of a major restructure to simplify the bank. Chief Executive Nuno Matos admitted it was difficult news, but says the shake-up was necessary to stay competitive in a rapidly changing banking environment.
Those decisions are very tough to take. You don't want to take them because they're going to impact people, our people, their families, and it should be the last resort. This is about getting the basic things right in our company. If you want, it's about avoiding duplication, reducing complexity on one hand, and on the other hand, it's about stopping projects and initiatives that don't align with our priorities.
The union says ANZ recently posted a 16% increase in profits. It also follows backlash over a bungled redundancy email that was sent to staff ahead of schedule last week. And another twist in the Jeffrey Epstein case. US lawmakers have released a copy of the convicted sex offender's 2003 birthday book, including a suggestive note allegedly written by US President Donald Trump. The note includes a message saying, quote, "Happy birthday and may every day be another wonderful secret," with a drawing of a female's body and the US president's alleged signature at the bottom. The White House has labelled the entire birthday card story, which was first published in the Wall Street Journal, as false, with the Deputy Chief of Staff today saying the signature on the note is not President Trump's. You can check the image of the alleged birthday note on our socials at The Briefing Podcast on Insta. Now it's time to get into our deep dive on the real-life succession drama unfolding in the Murdoch family. Today, a new deal was announced that cements Lachlan Murdoch's power to run the multi-billion-dollar media empire when his father Rupert passes away. So are the legal battles over? And what does this mean for Rupert's other children? Joining us is Nine Newspapers journalist Calum Jaspan. Calum, thanks so much for joining us. You've written a great piece about this latest development in the Murdoch family today. Let's start at the beginning. This was set up as part of Rupert Murdoch's divorce settlement from his second wife, Anna Murdoch, who is, of course, the mother of three of his children. Can you take us back to how this started?
Yeah, so the court case was really the result of a decades-long game that Rupert Murdoch has essentially played with his kids, publicly pitting them against each other in somewhat of a fight to succeed him at the head of the family business. The family trust, as it was, as you say, created when Rupert split from his second wife, Anna, and that was set up so that in the event of Rupert's eventual death, his equal 4 voting shares would essentially disappear, and each of his 4 eldest kids, that being Prudence from his first marriage and Elisabeth, Lachlan and James from his second marriage, would each get an equal voting say, essentially, over the totality of the assets in the Murdoch family empire. At that time, that was, a pretty big thing, because you think about now the sort of vast suite of assets that News Corp have across the world. We're talking about the papers here in Australia, the Australian, the daily tabloids, Sky News Australia, and then over in America, you've got the likes of Fox News and the Wall Street Journal and a couple of influential papers in the UK. But at that time, they also had the film studio, which was Fox Studios, which they eventually sold in 2019 for a pretty tasty $71 billion US, I should say. So it was a pretty momentous sort of exit deal that Anna managed to negotiate as part of that divorce settlement with Rupert, sort of forfeiting, potentially trying to go for half of his wealth, as sometimes happens in divorces, instead looking to try and really secure her children's access to some of that family wealth down the line.
So what happened to that deal, Calum? Because this is really, really fascinating. Then, of course, this all ended up in court. So tell us how we got to this court case, which was a very, very public falling out between Lachlan and his other siblings.
So as was the nature of this trust that we've just been talking about, it was an irrevocable family trust, which means once the details of that trust were locked in, it's very, very hard to actually change the structure or the eventual sort of outcomes from the trust. So after, I believe, 2020, when James Murdoch sort of quite publicly left News Corp, in turn sort of quite strongly critiquing aspects of the family business, including its editorial output on topics such as climate change around the time of the 2020 bushfires, there was this growing sense that the 3 siblings that were outside the company, that being James, Elisabeth and Prudence, led by James, might eventually try and oust Lachlan from the company should Rupert eventually die. Now, there's a famous quote from a biography written about Lachlan Murdoch, I think in 2022, which was, "The day that Rupert dies is the day that Lachlan gets fired." And so this sort of added to the, in a sense, paranoia between both Lachlan and Rupert. By that point, Lachlan had sort of quite clearly been chosen as the successor in the family business. He is much more similar politically to Rupert, and Rupert believed that the best chance of his legacy sort of living on at the sort of suite of assets he'd spent his whole life building was most safe in Lachlan's hands. And so in 2023, Lachlan, aided by his longtime advisor, Siobhan McKenna, who's here in Australia, hatched this plan, basically, as it was described, to go, instead of defence, go on offence and try and essentially get those other sort of troublesome siblings, as they were sort of described, out of this setup in a way to ensure that Lachlan would be able to sort of stay on as the sole ruler of the family empire. And the way this was done was they enlisted some lawyers in Nevada, which is where the family trust was located, and they hatched this plan, very aptly named Project Harmony. That was the wish, I guess, was the hope was that it would turn out in that way, but what sort of followed was anything but that. And the argument they made was that the totality of the assets were better in Lachlan's hands because he was most likely to preserve the conservative editorial voice that has been so financially successful for both News and Fox Corp over the past 7 decades.
So that trust that Lachlan had tried to organise, that Project Harmony, then ended up in court. And from what we can understand, Project Harmony lost, correct?
Yeah, that's right. I mean, essentially they had to argue the efforts to overturn this irrevocable trust were being done in good faith and for the benefit of everyone involved. And that was essentially their argument, as I said there, was that Lachlan and Rupert's side had argued that, in fact, if they were to remove the voting power from those three other siblings while maintaining their economic interests, that they would actually be better off with Lachlan leading it. And the threat was that should Rupert die and Lachlan was fired by his siblings, that they may be led by either Elisabeth or James, who have extensive history in both media and the family business, might take the company down a more moderate editorial voice. Now, the whole thing played out completely behind closed doors in Nevada, in Reno, in a probate court there. So it was really until a number of stories emerged in the media, most prominently in the New York Times, both in mid-last year and then in February this year, when we learned of the actual result, that Lachlan and Rupert had actually lost. And the judge, probate commissioner Edmund J. Gorman, was actually quite scathing of their attempt, saying that they had conducted the whole sort of Project Harmony plan in bad faith.
So the developments today have clearly been out of nowhere, and many would say they didn't see this coming, that statements from both News Corp and Fox Corp said a mutual resolution on the legal proceedings relating to the Murdoch Family Trust has been reached, resulting in the termination of all litigation and severing of ties with three of Murdoch's children. So to play that out, basically, Lachlan is now the clear successor.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, it was a surprise in a sense. I was certainly surprised when I got the email at 6 a.m. today. And I think, some people might have thought that the siblings may have been angling for a bigger payday. But that they had this settlement came while we were still in the process of waiting for the result and the judgment of the appeals process, which has been ongoing sort of since earlier this year. There was, sort of people I've been speaking to today inside the Murdoch camp suggested that an interview that James conducted with the American magazine The Atlantic in February this year was somewhat of a turning point, because while this appeals process was sort of ongoing, he went to this publication, The Atlantic, did a sort of several-hour sit-down interview and sort of slagged off his father and his brother. I think he called Rupert, who, the two of them barely speak anymore, but he called him a misogynist, amongst other things. So after that, a few months down the line, they did go back to the negotiating table, and I think there was probably a bit of a sense that everyone, after this had become such a public spat, obviously all the parallels with the TV show Succession, which is sort of loosely based on the family, it looks like they've sort of put the feelings to a side and just found a way to make a deal, which Rupert is sort of so well renowned for over these past 7 decades.
Calum, in regards to breaking down the details, it looks like Lachlan will now have total control over the trust's voting power over Fox and News Corp's affairs, while Chloe and Grace, who are Rupert and Wendy Dang's 2 daughters, will retain a purely financial interest. The 3 other children, Prudence, Elisabeth and James, will reportedly receive $1.7 billion each.
That's right. A pretty good payday for I guess a stake in a business that your father built. Some would argue. As you say there, the sort of voting makeup of the trust now is totally in the hands of Lachlan. Chloe and Grace, while they are sort of part of this new trust, they retain absolutely no voting stake over the family assets going forward. That's right.
And we know that Rupert is 94, but still incredibly hands-on in day-to-day dealings with a lot of things right now. In regards to when he does pass away, it seems to be, yet again, the devil's in the detail here. Those 3 children, being Prudence, Elisabeth and James, cannot then try and oust Lachlan. Is that correct?
Yeah, so they're essentially barred. Well, I think as part of this agreement, they've agreed to no longer obviously have any shareholding in the company, and they're no longer able to buy their way back in. So it really does sort of future-proof Lachlan till at least 2050, which is when the new trust expires. Until that time, because in the previous iteration, the family trust was set to expire in 2030. But as you say there, Rupert, 94, while he might be quite old, he's still incredibly engaged. I think a big sort of indication of how involved he still is came in July when the Wall Street Journal reported on a letter that Donald Trump had allegedly written to Jeffrey Epstein some time ago. Obviously, this week there was an update to that story. I think it was today that actually vindicated the Wall Street Journal's reporting. But this is obviously off the back of the Wall Street Journal being sued alongside Rupert Murdoch himself by President Trump. And I think, the focus that was placed upon Rupert in that litigation really showed how involved he still is in the company, despite his sort of 94-year-old age, as you mentioned there.
We really appreciate you joining us. A fascinating insight indeed. Thanks, Calum.
Thanks for having me.
And that was media writer for the Sydney Morning Herald and The Age, Calum Jaspan. And that's it for this episode of the afternoon edition of The Briefing. We'd love you to subscribe or follow us on Instagram at The Briefing Podcast, and we'll be back in your feed tomorrow morning. I'm Natarsha Belling. Thanks for your company.